So welcome back to the second part of the tutorial for rendering the 3/4 view. As we start out in the second part, I'm going to go through and start grouping up a few layers to start cleaning up my layers menu over there. Flattening out a few things. Just like I said, I do this every once in a while just to keep it clean and understand what's going on and keeping it tidy. So I'm going to load up, you can kind of see I'm loading up some of the 3D images that were done for my model. And I'm kind of looking to see how the suspension was configured to figure that out in my drawing. It's sort of loosely based on F1 style suspension with the arms coming out and pushing them away from the body. So right now I'm just going to go in and add some suspension to the other side so that wheel doesn't look like it's floating there. And as you can see by my 3D image up there, that it kicks the wheel out in front of the car a little bit. So you kind of have this interesting cantilever style wheel setup. So I load that up to look at as reference for my rendering, and I'm just going in with just using a light gray, and I mean basically I'm designing right now. I'm not really, I am rendering, but I'm also designing at the same time, just figuring out how that suspension would kick out in front and hold the wheel on to the car. And I wanted to use light gray to just create some areas where I can kind of see where I'm putting that suspension. But just going in and doing the dark areas and the light areas, making it look metal. You'll see me in a little bit. I'll add the highlights and stuff to it to really make it shine. So here I switch to the color dodge tool, and this is where I start to go in and add some of the highlights for the different arms and stuff. And this is it's somewhat indicated, but it's also somewhat figured out as well. Since I have the 3D model, I don't spend a ton of time on it, partly because it's already been figured out. This is more of a rendering to kind of show the overall form and what the final car would look like. But you can tell that I have, four arms coming out there. There'd be two upper ones and two lower ones. Then I go in and adjust it here. Oops, I accidentally grabbed some extra stuff, so I go back in, redo it. And I use the skew tool to kind of mess with the positioning of the arms sticking out there. Another beautiful thing about using digital, you can go in and remanipulate stuff really quick. Just add in some more highlight areas here. Really trying to get that to read as suspension on the other side there. Then I turn on my, I'm going to mess with the wheels some and do the, basically the inside part of that wheel on the other side and start getting some of that laid in. You'd have it depends on whether you're using drum brakes or disc brakes. On this one I'm using discs, so I start to draw basically the inside of the wheel and how the disc would fit in there and the rim of the wheel. Because obviously when you're looking at the backside of a wheel, it's hollow. And then just going in and cleaning up a few areas on my wheels. Adding and erasing away a few things to just clean them up. And using these ellipse guides that I drew for myself is really important for cleaning up your wheels. So as I clean up my wheels here, it just looks a lot more crisp. It grounds the car better. Um, when a wheel is out of perspective or drawn not very well, it really deters from the drawing, and it can take away from a cool design a lot of times. And not benefit what you've worked so hard on if your wheels out of whack or looking funky. So you really want to spend some time on your wheels to make them look finished and at least drawn out nicely and well done. So when you draw the ellipse, you can see me duplicating these ellipses. And after you've got your ellipse in the right position, where you've got it tilted for your major and minor axis lineup, and if you're not familiar with the major and max, the major and the minor axis, the way that all lines up, it's on my YouTube channel at YouTube slash Future Elements, and I have a tutorial on there explaining how to draw your wheels on the major and minor axis, and your minor axis is actually your axle that runs through the wheels. So once you get it tilted to match your minor axis, then you just duplicate that ellipse and shrink it down to get your different pieces of the wheel. So you have an outer area for the tire, and then you have an inner area, kind of where the tire starts to bend down and then under. And then you have the start of your rim, and then you might have other pieces of the wheel inside there. For instance, like you've got the center area that's like where all your lug nuts go, or a spinner tile type setup as well. So then once you get that in there, and then you just start duplicating your ellipses to really clean up all the areas on the wheel. So right now, just getting in the wheels inside the tires, the yellow part. And then I'm selecting areas on the with the ellipse template, or the ellipse, and just erasing some rough edges around the wheel to kind of clean it up. And you might notice too that on these renderings that I've done, sometimes I'll use textures and pieces off other cars to complete renderings. A lot of times I'll do that to complete stuff faster. I really wanted to go through this whole thing to show rendering the whole thing from the beginning to start without using any pieces or any textures or anything like that. And I think it's highly important to learn this style of rendering where you're rendering everything, because when you do use reference or pictures, you know how to make it fit into your rendering. There's a lot of things that go on when you're putting that stuff in, where you'll have different hues and saturations from a photo. You need to go in and change that to make it look like it's part of your vehicle. And then when you learn how to render stuff without using the photo reference, it's a huge deal, and you learn how to place that stuff in there in a better way than if you just take the photo and stick it in there. I've seen instances where people have done that, where they take a photo and just place like a wheel in there on top of the car, and you can tell it's a place photo, and it really bothers me. Maybe it's a personal thing, but I don't like that, because it doesn't look like it's part of the rest of the rendering, which is not what you want. You want it to kind of match everything. So I think it's a really good lesson to learn when you render everything on your own. So you can see those three different ellipses that I have within the wheel. The first one is obviously the edge of the tire. The second one is basically the center part of basically what I would call the core area of the tire. It's kind of where it wraps around. And one method I've still carried over from using traditional methods is actually creating the wheel with edges on it, and it just creates a solid look. It's kind of a style preference too. I've seen people do wheels that are rounded off, and that's fine as well. But it's just something that I've always done with my wheels, is creating these hard edges. What it does is it allows you to create these nice areas for light and dark to really define what the wheel looks like. Because to render in a circle, to render as you're drawing around it, is pretty difficult. You can't do it unless you have an ellipse. And the only other way is to actually stroke that ellipse with like a soft brush, and that'll give you a soft core around the edge of that. So just getting into, I was defining all my, in fact, those two outer ellipses so that I could put in my light areas on top of the tires. So you can see me adding in the light here. And when you do your tires as well, when I'm doing a 3/4 view, I try to hit the most hot spot on the front tire that's facing you, which is the front 3/4 tire, or the front tire there, and create that as the hottest spot on all the tires. And partly is that has to do with a vignetting technique where you don't want to put hot spots all over the car. It kind of allows your eye to dance all over the car when you put some focus on the front wheel and you let everything else fade out. Right now I'm just trying some different textures to try to get the look of that old hot rod style tire where there's ridges along the edges. And I can't really find anything that fits. It just looks weird. I didn't like the look of it at all. So I just left it alone. I might revisit it later. So as you can see, when you're going through the renderings, it's fun to experiment with different brushes and stuff. Especially when you have the time and you're doing your own stuff, that's the best time to experiment with your stuff. When I'm doing client work, sometimes I'll experiment, but not too much, because you're really held by deadlines and stuff. And the more you experiment, obviously, the longer it takes you. And even these renderings probably took me a lot longer than most of the time. Two reasons. One is I did render everything. The other is I was experimenting, testing out stuff and playing around. But when you do that, you also learn new techniques to do your client work. So you can see how I use that inner ellipse to create the hubcap area. And what this is kind of a spinner, kind of an F1 style spinner from that uses a knockoff in the center. And then you can see I actually went up to my side view drawing and I grabbed the center knockoff and I brought it down into my 3/4 drawing. And it takes a little bit of manipulation after this to make it look like it's actually part of the wheel. You shrink it down. You also put the correct ellipse in it. And then what I've done here is I've actually extended out that center knockoff to give it some perspective on the wheel. So saving myself a little time there, instead of redrawing the whole thing, I've already done it up top. So, reuse a piece. There's nothing wrong with that. Going in, cleaning up some areas. Now, when you're kind of coming to this part of the rendering, when you start doing a lot of the detail work, it starts to you start to slow down quite a bit on the thing, where you're not moving as fast as you were. Partly because it takes a little more time to get in there and finesse some of this stuff. You might still be doing, when you're figuring out details at this point, you're still kind of doing some design work too, you know? So you're thinking through your mind, you know, how's this going to look? How do I need to render this? I like flipping the image too, and what that does is it kind of changes your perspective on it, where you're looking at to see how everything's lined up, see if your perspective is right and correct, see if things are going the right direction where they should be. So I start to play with that scoop back there a little bit because I see it's kind of it felt like it was tilting down. I think at this point I end up kind of leaving it and I come back later and fix it. But it just felt like it was slightly out. But you saw earlier on in the first part of the tutorial where I went in and remanipulated the whole drawing, where I realized that some of my stuff was off. Now I'm just going back and I'm drawing in perspective lines to figure out that scoop to see where I'm off on. So I'm going to go in and add the hole details on the wheels, and I'm also regrouping some of my layers again so that I can do this stuff and keep it clean. The other thing I wanted to make sure that I wasn't rendering over the top of a layer that I might want to turn off or get rid of or something like that. So now with these holes here, you're actually going to have a little bit. The wheel has a dish, so the holes would be ellipses on the wheels. Now I did hand draw these in. You could go in and really figure it out, but you know that's one of those small details that's not worth going in and doing unless you're doing an absolutely photoreal rendering. So you can see how you start adding the details. It really adds, you know, quite a bit to the vehicle as far as starting to make it look real. Looks like it has function. Looks like you could take that wheel off if you wanted to. And those are the kind of details that you really kind of need for, you know, man-made vehicles. You think about the way, you know, stuff is assembled or how it rolls or how it comes apart. It really just adds more to your drawing and your design. Because people look at it and go, oh, I know how that works. I understand that. It looks very different than what I've seen, but I understand how it works. There's some relation there for them to figure out how the vehicle works. That's one thing about, you know, you think about vehicles in Star Wars and stuff like that. Even though they were crazy ships and, you know, at the time they were crazy, people hadn't seen that kind of stuff very often. But Lucas was a, you know, a genius at that stuff, at making something that's it's different, but it was identifiable. You understood how that stuff worked, which was really cool, you know. And this is part of what I'm doing now is that you know I found a image of an engine online and I wanted to look at some more of the details. Um, I have rebuilt engines in the past, which has, you know, helped out as far as my knowledge of some of the mechanical stuff that goes on. But you know, even with having that knowledge, you know, it's nice to look at newer stuff that's come out, or you know, you might find even a cooler design uh, of what maybe you were thinking. You found something that has some neat details to it. I love this image of this engine that I found. Those red circles on top are intake inlets, and it has a really neat anodized look to it. Now with my design here, you can't really see it because it's underneath that scoop. But I take I like that really wide valve cover, and I just use that as kind of a basis to my design right there, and I just use it for reference. And I don't make it exactly like it is up there. One of the easy things you could do is just take that and clip that picture out. But like I said, I'm really I want to render everything right now just to show you guys that, you know, first of all, it's possible, and second of all, you learn form that way too. You know, when you look at that engine block, you see a lot of complicated areas, but really it's just a bunch of cubes, cylinders, and circles, all broken or all kind of put together to make one complicated object. So when you render stuff, you know, in your mind, you're breaking all that stuff down. Okay, this is actually a box, so it's going to have a top and four sides. So how do you render a top and four sides? You know, you can obviously render a box in so many different ways depending on how you light it. Now with my design here, I chose to light it from the top. So, you know, one of your lighter areas is going to be the top of the valve cover. Then I put a lighter area right on the edge that's facing, you know, most up in the sky. And then you basically are rendering a box, and all around that you figure out all the other forms that are intersecting with it, and you know they all have sides and tops as well. So how do you render that? And it's as you render and design more, you start to figure that stuff out. That, you know, anything you design is a series of shapes, and when you're rendering that stuff, you figure that out, and as you get better and better, you start to figure out how to render more complicated stuff, and even to draw more complicated things. Your mind starts to really put that stuff together as you do more. So right now, I knew that those pipes were a little too big, and the other thing too is they didn't really look like they were coming out of the block like they should be. So I had to go in and remanipulate a few things in there and make it look more to scale and also to the correct placement on the block. And since I'm using a typical engine up there, you want it to look somewhat right, you know, just so that people recognize what it is. You know, hey, that's an engine on there. It's a V8 engine. I know that. Unless you're, you know, if you're designing spaceships and things like that, you can obviously have newer technologies and remanipulate stuff so it's not as recognizable, but a lot of people will understand it's still an engine of some sort. Now here, the rear end of the design, obviously you're going to be able to see some of that stuff. So, and it's loosely based on a Jaguar rear end. So you have the suspension is actually on top of the rear part, like a F1 car, more or less. So I use this RC car up top to kind of look and see how the that suspension works, which is based off of an F1 car. Just so I can get in some details in the back there. I don't really focus in on exactly how all of it is put together, but just enough to give a detail, some indication back there so that it didn't look like it was just going off into nothing. And so you can see that I'm using a darker shade of that kind of a warm gray. I didn't want to go black in the back. Um, One is that you don't want to go solid black in the back because black actually attracts your eye. You want more of your solid blacks and your darker colors towards the front. most of the time. That's not true all the time. It kind of depends on the scene that your car's in or your vehicle or whatever you're drawing. But when I'm designing, I keep most of my blacks towards the front, and that's kind of another vignetting technique that you learn to guide the eye through the whole object, where you have all your darks and your highest contrast up front, and then you have your lower contrast and less saturation towards the back. And it adds depth, it adds interest to your object that you're working on. So I'm working over that block a little bit more. And I chose red. I like the red valve cover. When you throw some color throughout there for the engine and pieces coming out, it's another way too to guide the eye through your piece using color. Another interesting thing that I've read about before too is that circles attract the human eye. So anytime you draw a circle, the human eyes it automatically identifies with a circle in it, and it tends to gravitate towards anything that's a circle. I know when I read that, I started concentrating on it and realizing that was true. That anything that's in a circle, you focus onto. I think that's another reason why wheels are important on a car, is that a human recognizes the circle, and if it's out of whack, even if you don't know how to draw it, you know that it's off, and it bothers people, and it really, like I said, it'll detract from your design or your drawing that you're working on. So one of my main things I would recommend anyone to focus on when they're drawing cars or vehicles, if they're doing ellipses, make them right, figure it out, ask a friend, or if somebody knows how to do it, ask them, or look up tutorials on drawing ellipses. Right now what I'm doing is going in and just laying some real quick groundwork for my shadow, just to ground the car so it doesn't look like it's floating there anymore. It kind of bothers me because I feel like it's floating in the air. And then what I do is, so I basically drew a path in there, and I did that to kind of give me some groundwork for where everything sits, and you can go back and remanipulate it like you want it. Then you go ahead and select the area, and you can go in and I go from dark to light on the selected area. You'll see me do that, and that also adds depth to the car sitting on the pavement or wherever it's sitting on the sand. And then I kind of pick a darker tone of what the ground is. So I kind of fade it out towards the back where it's not as dark. And again, I want you to feel free. I've included the Photoshop file of this vehicle on the DVD. You can download it and open it up in Photoshop to take a look at, see how my layers are. Like I said, I kept grouping them all the way down. So there you go with the shadow. You can see how I went from dark to light in the back. Just adding, again, like I said, it gives depth to the object that you're rendering. Now I'm going to go over here and start working on the inner workings of the wheel. I didn't want it to be totally solid. So working on a disc. Now I don't spend a lot of time on this wheel, but just enough to give some indication of form. That it's got some form, it's hollowed out, and that giving it some depth and some interest. But like I said, I don't go in and totally render out the whole thing. Just enough to give some indication of something's in there. And again, that's another personal preference. I see some guys that would render, you know, this stuff in full fledged detail. And I think sometimes when you leave some stuff to the imagination, it's always cool because the viewer actually fills it in. And it creates more interest for the viewer too. That when not everything's filled in and detailed out, it creates this, it gets their imagination going, and they want to look at it more and more. I know I find myself as an artist like that. I tend to like people that leave or that work really loose. I love, impressionist paintings. Those guys were masters at leaving, stuff to people's imaginations a lot of times. So I flip it here. We're getting close to really getting this thing done. Some of the stuff I got left to do is graphics, matching the graphics up top, doing some of the paneling work. So up to this point, I probably had spent about approximately a whole hour on this rendering. And as you could see, you could actually turn this over and it could be totally done. I mean, anybody could build something off of this. Um, Pretty much after this point, I start kind of playing around with a few things, and I end up adding a few extra um, highlights and things like that, just to define some areas more. The one thing you can do with digital drawings is you can really overwork them. You can keep going and going and going and going. You could even zoom in and render stuff to a super high level of detail, which I've seen people do that too, and more power to them. I tend to not work like that. Uh, my mind is more like I like doing the concept design and getting the initial shape and moving forward. And again, that's a style thing. Some people are well known for doing a high level of detail. I myself, I've done a few like that, and I get so bored after a while, and that's just the way I think and I operate. And sometimes I have to do that, and I have to really press forward to get those details in there right. But if it was up to me, I'd rather do 20 rough sketches to get something really cool out, render it up in the most efficient way possible, and leave it after that and move on to the next design. So right now I took that side piece that I finished up and brought it down to the 3/4 rendering, kind of like I did on the wheel area, using the detail that I've already done on that side view and bringing it down to the 3/4, just so you don't have to re-render the whole thing, and it also provides pretty much the same look as it does up there on the side view, so you're not trying to get all your stuff perfect while you're re-rendering it. You've already done it, so just use it. Then you can see I use my line tool down there again and just get some crisp edges, like I showed in the side view before. So that stuff towards the front, that mechanical detail I drew in there, it's more indication, just showing that there's something there. Maybe they're leftover parts from the airplane that was taken apart. Maybe they're even functional parts that are being used to run the car. But it's just something to add interest. Right now I'm getting ready to do all the graphics on the 3/4 view. Now that's something you could pull down, but it's a little tougher. Partly because you can see that I'm creating that bend in the graphics. It's actually in a perspective now versus straight on. I did put the perspective somewhat in the graphics up top, but it wouldn't have been accurate if I just brought it down. I would have had to really manipulate it to get it to fit on that body side, and it would have taken so much manipulation that I finally, or that I just decided to draw the lines and get it in a lot faster like that. Now here you can see, obviously the top is going to be the lighter part. The lower section is going to be darker, so you use a gray and the white. And then I go in and I use the in the palette up there, I switch it to overlay so that it's over the top of the metal, and you get some of the metal bleeding through too, and it also helps define those graphics. So here now I'm drawing that center stripe, the black one, and I did that. I left the two paths that I created the white, and I just inverted the paths, and then I just drew the black in between the two white stripes. And then same with this one, I end up changing it to overlay to get it to match the top. And the graphics here too are, definitely inspired by that P51 that you might have seen earlier. So now I'm just going in and looking at a few things and detailing it out. I didn't like the way my suspension was still sitting on the front, so I tweaked it to angle it down so it's kind of aimed towards that open area on the fuselage area. But yeah, going in and adding some more highlights, looking at the tires need a little detail on top, just to show where the light was hitting it. And again, you could even go in even further on these tires and add all kinds of texture and what the actual tire tread would look like, and those are things that I just myself I don't thrive on. I would rather just indicate it. So right now I'm trying a few different brushes to make it look like just the tires have some texture. So I end up using that same brush that I used on the metal to give it a scraped look. Then I go back. So I ended up hitting it with a highlight at first, and then I went back with the black and went over it with black next. And then again, treating these tires like a cylinder, so I actually do the core right in the middle there. So you have the highlight on top, and then on the bottom you'll have some reflected light, bouncing back up on the tire from the ground. And creating a little bit of a hot spot on the wheels. Again, this is going back to kind of, I talked about this earlier, where I put the hotter spot on that front 3/4 wheel, and what that does is it draws your eye instantly to that area, and then your eye will follow back through the rest of the car. So even when you're drawing a single vehicle, you're getting this 1, 2, 3 read, like you do in an environment, or if you're creating a composition, usually you want a 1, 2, 3 read in it. You can go up even higher than 3, but you want your eye to flow through the whole thing and not. So when you highly detail the whole object, your eye just doesn't know where to focus, and a lot of times I think that's another reason why I find myself getting bored with renderings that are totally detailed out, is that everything's defined, and it almost becomes boring to my mind. So leaving some of the stuff rough and unrendered. And then also, like I said, the other thing that you want to do too is not only is the hot spot kind of in front there, but you also want more of your detail showing on kind of the front 3/4 that's closest to you, and then letting the detail kind of fade away as it goes towards the back. These are all just, little tricks that I learned in school, and also just from watching other artists and designers, people that I really admire and look up to see how they work their stuff. What makes one designer's stuff interesting and another one not so interesting? It's part of its personal taste on what you guys like and don't like, and the other is a lot of times the way their rendering techniques. I obviously some people have a quite a following, that some are real successful and others aren't. And I think a lot of it has to do with, how are they handling their drawings and their renderings and their designs. Really study that. I still do. I still consider myself a student. I observe all kinds of stuff out there, anything from home ideas to artists and graphic designers, everybody. I feel like I can constantly learn stuff. So what I'm doing here is I decided that everything was kind of a little too warm for my taste. I got the warm background, I got yellow wheels, I got a red engine. I've got the blue pipes, but that's about it. So I was like, I really want this thing to look a little more like metal. So I wanted to add some blue as if it was reflecting the color of the sky. So I went in and added that, and I did it in a little different way. I didn't start out by rendering. I actually just went over the top of my existing rendering and added in the blue, and then I messed with the filters over there, or the layer options. And so I went in, and when you're doing the sky, you go from dark to light. So you have this really dark blue, and you fade onto the horizon, which is a lighter blue. And then I use the color dodge for the very edge of the vehicle to really give it a hot spot. Again, that's actually an area where that's drawn in the eye. It draws in your eye to how into the vehicle where you have these hot spots hitting it. So I realize I've got this, it's reflecting the blue up in the sky, and I need to do it back here on the shoulder because it's facing up as well. And then adding a pretty dark core to that edge right there, where that would be the horizon, and coming down the body. And then as it goes down the body, it'll actually get lighter again. I explained that a little bit before. Again, visit my YouTube channel on at Future Elements on YouTube, and you'll see I've got several basic stuff on there. Explaining the wheels, especially, was one of the big ones. And then also just look there in the future too, because I'll have some more basic stuff on there explaining cores and things like that. So right here again, I'm just rendering right over the top of this. It's kind of a different method than I usually use when I'm rendering sky tones on an object. A lot of times when I do this, I go into the rendering and I start it out like that. And with this one, I didn't, so I would have had to redo a lot of rendering. So I figured I'll just draw blue over the top and mess with some of the filters, the layer options right there, to see if I can get it to look right. As you can see, it really, it changes depending on what you have your filter at. So I kind of like the way this ended up looking. It kind of gave it a neat, a neat hue almost to the metal. They go back and add it on top of that scoop too. Obviously, that would be a really hot spot because that's facing up. So what I was looking at here is putting the horizon on the on the actual scoop back there. But then I decided it's probably not the best way to define it, so I went back to the ground on the edge there, going from ground or the horizon to the and getting lighters that coming towards you. It defined it a lot better, gave it some more value that way. So I keep panning out, and I look at it when it's small and seeing what my lights and darks and how everything's working together. So here I ended up duplicating that blue because I wanted to replicate that up on top and create that same metallic look for the top one. And this is just using the skew tool in there, and I duplicated where that blue was, and I duplicated the layer and took it up there and put it on there and stretched it and skewed it, and then went back and just erased where it was going over the object and into areas that I didn't want it to go in. It was actually a really quick way to create the blue tones for the sky. And it gives it a really neat kind of metallic looking body now. And I looked at some reference images too from some of the old World War II planes and stuff to kind of really get this or came to this final rendering state like this, so it would look like the body of an old plane that was made out of metal. So just hitting all the surfaces that are facing up towards the sky, giving it all that giving it the sky tone, so it looks like there's form there. So here I decide I need to carry that blue all the way down because that shoulder is actually bending right there, so it needs to face towards the sky. I realized that I only carried it so far, so I had to go back and carry it all the way down the body. So I just went back and remanipulated the blue tones and went back and erased what I wasn't using. So just panning out, looking at it, seeing what it looks like. So I go back and I ended up changing it back to normal so I could erase all the blue that was kind of overextending the vehicle. So I didn't have any weird blue tones for the final rendering. Make sure you saved often. So this is almost done. We're almost completed here. I'm going in and doing a little bit of color dodge in little tiny areas. Just adding some ridges to the top of those bars across the windows. And then also hitting some of the panels, because obviously the paneling on a plane catches light, as it's got a ridge. Getting all the areas here that needed to be that are facing the sky, so they're blue. And then also putting some edges on some of this stuff. Yeah, this is kind of the fun part when you get to, these little fine details. It's really when it starts to pop your image out there. Especially when you start putting edges on everything, it really starts to finalize your object and gives it um, some details and finished pieces that look like they really exist. So you have highlights obviously all over metal. This ends up looking pretty much like my final design, my final model. If you look at it in the book, you can see my final model. In there, I have some shots of it. It's still a little bit of an incomplete right now, but I need to just finish up some of the suspension and get in some of the details, and it'll definitely look a lot like this. So you can see me zoom in. You can still see that stuff is, somewhat loose still. You can leave stuff loose as long as it's, got some definition to it. Going through, I'm going to clean up a few of my layers again. Here I ended up realizing I didn't finish rendering my knockoffs in the wheels, so went and added some quick highlights to them just to give it some more depth. And then I decided I needed to do the small nuts inside the wheels too. So at this point, like I said, I feel like I'm probably noodling too much. um, and just putting a few final touches on it. I mean, it could have been done a little bit ago, but you know it's always fun as an artist to keep messing with stuff a little bit. So that's pretty much the final rendering. Sign it, date it, and it's all done. So feel free to go ahead and open this up in Photoshop and take a look. And thanks for watching.